She's someone who truly leverages her voice as a force for good with her extraordinary social media platform, but the causes and communities that she aligns with in a meaningful way. So Priyanka, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maura, for having me. Thank you everyone for being here.
Priyanka, I want to start off by talking about some of the defining influences that really have motivated this activism and philanthropy. We just heard from Randall and Chris the need for high net worth individuals to give in a more meaningful way. But you're someone who has been involved with Global Citizen, but also really issues such as education and health. Talk a little bit about some of the defining influences that really catalyze this passion for you at a very early age.
Yes, very much so. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I was raised in India. I grew up there predominant part of my life. And growing up in a country where you see wealth and poverty live together in such a symbiotic way, where sometimes people seeing that become sort of, desensitized to it. And I think I was very aware of not being desensitized to it when I was very young. My parents are both physicians, and I remember when I was about 9 years old, my parents would take this ambulance and go into small villages in India. We used to live in a place called Bareilly at that point, which is a really small town. And we used to go into these villages, and my mom, who was an OBGYN, used to provide medical services for women that were not allowed to come out of their homes or were not allowed to access medicine. And I remember at like 9 or 10 asking my mom that, why do we only see boys come to our ambulance? Why aren't we seeing more girls? And my mother tried to explain to me at such a young age that it was probably because of differences in society, the fact that I was raised with an education, that I went to school, that I was raised by parents who gave me options and choices in my own lives. And there were so many girls that didn't have that. And it blew my 9-year-old mind that being daughters of the same country, we can have such a distinction between how we are raised. And I think that really moved me into understanding the privilege that I had. I might not be a billionaire that can make the contributions that we're talking about, but I know that as soon as I had a little bit of a platform, when I started my work in the entertainment business almost 20 years ago, I understood the power of influence. I understood the power of keeping the conversation going. I understood the power of not letting it die down, to understand the urgency. And I think that's what made me want to be involved in every possible way.
We've talked throughout the day about the urgent need to eradicate extreme poverty. Countries like India, it still exists. We're seeing sort of some change in terms of numbers closing the gap in other countries. In Nigeria, for example, we're seeing actually the reverse trend. An issue that you've been incredibly passionate is education. You said education has always been very important to me. It means you don't have to depend on anyone else. Talk a little bit about your perspectives on education and how you see that as such a pivotal force in being able to really move these needles and these numbers in a positive direction.
And Maura, you said it yourself when we talk about India, which is one of the poorest nations in the world with one of the largest populations in the world, and the fact that there is actually an encouraging statistic to see that poverty is actually on the decline in India. You can see that through the massive campaigns that India as a country has done. Like there was this Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which means education for all, which has now almost put 200 million kids in school, and about 80% of the states in India have achieved kids in primary schools, and those are big numbers for a developing country like that. Eradicating polio, for example. 11 years ago, 60% of the world's polio cases were in India. 5 years later, eradicated. And that was because of a massive, massive campaign that the government and almost 200 million volunteers, top down, bottom up, got together and said that we're going to make this change in this country. Yes, there's a lot more work to be done. And of course, extreme poverty is not eradicated. But when you see countries like Nigeria and a lot of other countries where you see extreme poverty on an increase, and you can see the factors are quite a few. Climate change, like Eddie mentioned earlier, that it's all interconnected. Climate change, lack of education, extreme poverty, the fact that that kids don't have the access to go to school, or the lack of education, or female rights. All of these coming together creates a incestuous sort of, vortex of just being within the same circle. Like in Nigeria, the average family has about 7 children born into poverty. Now that cycle doesn't stop unless you educate those kids, unless countries invest in their people. This again goes back to the human capital conversation that we were having earlier. If countries invest in their people, you create populations which other people want to invest in. And I think that is so powerful.
You talked a moment ago about the fact that sort of with your platform, you had a sense of responsibility, social responsibility, even very, very early in your career. When you look at Priyanka's social media platforms, for example, you have over 100 million followers. And with that platform, as I said, can come responsibility. Global Citizen leverages social media in a very innovative way to activate change, to activate individuals, to have a voice, and to be able to be part of a collective entity to drive change. Talk a little bit about how you've thought about your own platform and how and when you use your voice to activate change, and especially as it relates to being able to be a part of these larger movements such as Global Citizen.
I think what I love about the Global Citizen module is that it has taken technology, which is at the forefront of our generation, obviously, and used that to give citizens, everyday citizens, the ammunition and the knowledge to be able to be agents of change, to implore and demand change from the governments that promised it. And that is the power of technology today. I mean, in my own little way, whenever I have the opportunity, I use my platform to be able to talk about things that are important to me. For example, everything that we're doing here today, my alignment with Global Citizen, my alignment with UNICEF, to be able to give people as much information as I can in my little way from my experiences. But the fact that Global Citizen does this on such a large scale, and we've seen that with the progress that they have made. I mean, the urgency is right now, and this conversation is so interesting and so important at the moment. Just like Chris said earlier with Randolph, that it's people like Bill Gates, people like Warren Buffett have shown us that philanthropy and people can make phenomenal impact. People like that can make phenomenal impacts when they just take a little bit out of their immense wealth and help us make that difference. Look, that doesn't mean that the governments that made this promise in 2015 at UNGA, when they said that we have these SDGs and by 2030 we are going to achieve them, they're not off the hook. They absolutely are not. They're just too slow. We are 5 years into this promise and we're completely off track. We have 10 years, like they said, to make $350 billion annually to be able to reach a place where we can eradicate extreme poverty, and not even just poverty. Extreme poverty, which is people living under $1.90 a day. That's absolutely doable, and that's doable if we all take it upon our hands to implore the urgency upon people. And like you said, with my social media, I can do as little as I can. I can come here, have a conversation with all of you, and say this, but I think it's really, really important to move and shake and demand that change.
You said, speaking of this, you said, quote, philanthropy today has gone beyond just funding projects. Be disruptive, show compassion, care, be catalytic in our actions and solutions. History has shown us some incredible women who have been change agents. And most recently, we've seen a lot of young women as well, whether it be Malala on education, Greta Thunberg on climate change and action, really taking the lead in catalyzing global conversations and movements. We're seeing amazing women leading the charge. Why do you think this is? What opportunity does it represent for women specifically to really be this incredible force for connecting citizens around the world?
Well, first and foremost, thank God. I mean, thank God it's happening. High time. First and foremost, look, I do credit the fact that women always had voices. We were always talking, we were always demanding. There have been incredible women that have come before this generation that have demanded change. Women who fought for our right to drive, women who fought for our right to vote, women who fought for our right to have jobs. But still, we are in a place where, in many countries around the world, women make a third of what men make in the same jobs. There are places where women don't have a choice in their own lives, when they get married, when they have children, whether they have the opportunity to get an education or not. I think what is amazing about this generation is that technology has given women the ability to have their voices heard. You know, when they are sitting and with the development of or the invention of the internet, I think that women sitting in their homes, within the safety of their homes, have the ability to talk about their opinions, garner support. Another thing I think which is given the ability for young girls to not know a world where their voices are not heard, to not know a world where they have to be scared to talk in front of world leaders, is because the generation before us fought so hard to make sure that we collaborate with each other. Women aligning with women is one of the biggest reasons our voices are being heard, because we are creating opportunities. The lack of opportunity is what made women quiet. We used to have to fend and fight off each other to get that one job that 7 other men were up for. They had 7 jobs for men, but that one job for women. And we had to fight each other off and be mean to each other. But we've created those opportunities ourselves. Like if I talk about entertainment in my own business, you know, when there are not parts for girls that are written which are great, as good as men, women today call each other up and say, you know what, let's do it together. Let's just produce it together. That's the power of women coming together and standing up for each other. The second thing is how technology really helps is finally we have a direct way to talk to you without men mediating in between and editing our voices. So that gives us the direct ability to say, this is what I mean, and I don't need you to translate that.
So if technology is such an empowering tool and it's really given a voice and a platform for many who are voiceless for generations and centuries, but I want to talk a little bit about women and girls, because you may have access to those opportunities, but if you still face stigmas and biases, you're coming against institutional barriers, whether it be in education, health, issues of poverty and the like. And you've talked about the contrast of this in India, where you do have this extraordinary modernity coupled with still some of those traditional systemic barriers that make it difficult for women to access opportunity. You're someone who's an extraordinary role model in that country, and obviously beyond and on the world stage, though, of what a modern woman can look like, someone who has a voice and a career, and can achieve amazing success. Talk a little bit about what you hope to see for your country with women and girls, but also the role that you feel like you play in being able to shatter some of those stigmas and biases that are still so entrenched.
That's a very complicated question with no easy answer, first and foremost. I think that, I believe that modernity and tradition don't have to be enemies. I feel like modernity and tradition can go hand in hand. I feel like there are countries where culturally, the things that we have been raised with, which is India included, are very important to us as citizens. I believe in certain cultural aspects that have been taught to me by my parents and my grandparents, but at the same time I believe in being able to have a voice, and I feel like the world needs to reach that place where we can allow people to have cultural beliefs and traditions, but at the same time give them the opportunity to succeed. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I feel like India is at a precipice of that, where we have this incredible young generation, and you can see that with everything that's happening in India right now. One of the youngest countries in the world, about 60% of the population being under the age of 35, coming onto the streets and demanding a change. And that comes from us empowering our own girls. You will see the movement, like you said, you mentioned a lot of the girls, Greta, Nadia, Emma, and I can mention a bunch of girls from India that have come out there and stood up and said, I want the change and I will demand it and I will be fearless, despite and in spite of all the restrictions. And I am inspired by those girls. I mean, I don't know if when I was 15 or 16, if I would have had the courage to do what all of these young girls are doing today. Today, I take inspiration from all of them to become a better activist, to become a better person, to become a better philanthropist. And I feel like it's so amazing to finally see the power that these girls are getting and the power that they have, because I sit back in my chair in my 30s and say, wow, if I had this empowerment at maybe 12, which I think in my own way I did with my parents, but if I had a world that looked like this, I could have said and been so much more. And if I feel that way, can you imagine our girls who have been completely marginalized? I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful time. It's a difficult time. But the fact that you can see so many women around the world standing up for themselves is very, very inspiring.
As we wrap up, one last question for you. Today we've talked about the multitude of stakeholders that need to be involved, government, private sector, individuals such as yourself with a huge voice and a huge platform. What's been your biggest lesson that you've learned personally around activating change and using your voice? And what's one piece of advice that you would give to aspiring change makers as they look to create a better world in the future?
Well, the one thing that I've definitely learned is a lot of people always say that, I'm just one person, what can I do? I'm just one person, what can I do? Each drop of water makes an ocean. Each one of us collectively coming together and having voices. There are 17 sustainable development goals. It's not 200, there's just 17. If we remember each one of them and see which ones are important to us, which ones affect us, our communities, and get behind it. Just find time in your life to have a little bit of compassion. Give a little bit of your time. It doesn't have to be money that'll change your lives. But the one thing I've learned is each person makes a difference. And if we look back into our own lives and into our own homes and ask ourselves, have we, in our own little way, touched the lives of one person at least? That's what's going to make your life successful. My mom always told me this: no matter how badly off you are in life, someone else is worse off than you. Just think about that. And the second thing, I feel like the advice, I don't think I can give any advice. I haven't really been able to contribute as much as so many other people around the world have, but the one piece of advice that I would give is, we're at the beginning of this new decade, and last year, 2019, was the second hottest year ever on record. We, in the history of humankind, are seeing the worst refugee crisis that we have ever seen. That's not okay. Like I said, in many countries around the world, women get paid 1/3 of what men get paid. So if, in an ideal world, I'd like to give advice to activists that are coming up, let's work towards achieving a world where, when I speak to a refugee child and I say, what are your dreams? And that child says, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be an engineer, or I want to be an astronaut. Let's bring the world to a place where that child's dream is achievable, where that child can get an education, where that child can have papers, where that child can actually have a future. I would love to get to a place where my children, when I have them, can grow up in a world where the world leaders have listened to Greta's generation, where the world leaders have paid attention to that generation. I want my kids to grow up in that world where the climate crisis is contained, if not averted. I want to be able to live in a place where a woman's ability to succeed should be a basic human right and not based on geography or chance. I guess that's the world I would like.
Well, thank you, Priyanka. You are someone who is helping to make the world a reality, and such a powerful reminder that each of us can have a role to play, regardless of resources, platform. We all have opportunity, and thank you for the contributions that you've made and the advice that I think all of us in this room can take to heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here.